name is TJ Johnson, and this is my presentation on the Hoover family for my Direct Service 2 course on the movie The Little Miss Sunshine. Throughout this presentation, I will be discussing the Hoover family from the movie titled Little Miss Sunshine. This movie was a great watch, filled with lots of data for me to collect. Not only will I be discussing my data findings, I will also be applying that data into a genogram and a family assessment device, aka FAD. Who are the Hoovers, you ask? Let's meet them. The Hoovers are a multi-generational family of six that consists of Edwin Hoover, who we will call Grandpa, that struggles with substance use disorder, possibly have an undiagnosed PTSD and intermittent explosive disorder, who actually passes away midway into the movie. Next, the head of the household, which is Richard Hoover. Richard is a self-employed motivational speaker who aspires to be a book author, but you can see how he is kind of controlling and sometimes manipulative. Next, we have the mother of the family. Cheryl Hoover. Little is known about what she does outside of the home, but she is often seen to be a bit of a liar and somewhat of a manipulator herself. Next up, we have the maternal Uncle Frank. Frank's last name was never disclosed, but we know that he is a part of the LGBT plus Q plus community who suffers from a form of depression and has a history of acting on self-harm and his suicidal ideations. Then we have Dwayne, who is the son of Richard and Cheryl, who also shows signs of depression and struggles with emotional regulation. Dwayne has taken a vow of silence until he becomes a pilot, but his dreams are crushed once he discovers that he is colorblind. Lastly, Little Miss Sunshine, aka Olive, the daughter of Richard and Cheryl, who aspires to be a beauty pageant queen. Olive is very optimistic, who struggles with self-esteem and body positivity. Here we have my lovely genogram. This was fun to make, so let's get into this. First, we're going to start from the top left, where we have Frank and Cheryl's parents, who were never really discussed in the movie. You can then see where we have Grandpa Edwin and his divorced wife, aka Richard's mom, which is why there is a slash on their line, indicating that they are no longer together. Grandpa Square looks the way it does because he passes away in the movie and abuses different types of substances, mainly heroin. Next, you see Larry Sugarman, who was a failed love interest for Uncle Frank. This is seen by the slash indicating they are exes. Uncle Frank Square indicates that he suffers from mental health issues and is depressed. Cheryl Circle has a green arrow pointing towards her brother. This signifies that she is his current caretaker due to her requesting he be discharged after a failed suicide attempt because of their financial struggles. Richard has two arrows, the same green one that indicates he was also the caretaker of Grandpa Edwin prior to him passing. The red arrow with the X in the box indicates his controlling behaviors, which was identified by the way he speaks to his family. The red double arrow will be discussed in a few moments. Next, we have Dwayne on the final line. His half block in his square indicates his physical illness, aka him being colorblind. Lastly, we have Olive, and you see the back to the double arrow. This indicates Richard being manipulative, seen by how he attempts to make her not want to eat ice cream and her being a winner versus a loser. This was a form of manipulation to keep Olive from eating the ice cream, aka becoming fat. Throughout this movie, we see a lot of debilitating issues for the family. Some of the main things I would like to briefly discuss is the mental health, drug addiction, family financial struggles, and the multi-generational household as it pertains to this movie. First, with the mental health, there are multiple things that can be discussed as it pertains to mental health, such as Uncle Frank's his diagnosis, him being depressed, the self-harming, and the suicide attempt. He was hospitalized. He in the beginning of the movie. You can also see some signs of depression in some of the behaviors that Dwayne displays in the movie. Originally, I was going to identify him not speaking as one of those behaviors, but we later learned that he takes a vow of silence to help him, keep his head on straight and meet his goals, which is to be a pilot. But he do still show other signs such as being distant, the quote unquote hatred that he feels towards his family that he sometimes verbalizes and even write out to the family. Those things are just a couple of signs that you see. And then on top of that, you also have like kind of the positive side of the mental health, by this movie being coming out in 2006. um, you can see where the family was trying to educate Olive in the beginning, um, when she, was inquiring about how Uncle Frank got his bandages. And I think that they kind of tried to, in a way, show that in a good way, in a positive way, using positive, more, a little bit more positive communication skills, they could, you can educate people on these mental health. And when I say people, I mean children. You can educate them on different mental health things and how certain things can happen, and how to look out for them. And I think they kind of tried to do that with that scene. Next is the drug addiction. You see where Grandpa, his very first scene, we're introduced to him doing heroin, and he just explains how he started using heroin, and I think that that is also a thing that I appreciate that they touched on, because drug addiction it comes in many forms. A substance use disorder, it can happen to anybody, no matter age, sex, race. It can literally happen to any and everybody. The next thing I would kind of like to kind of touch on is the multi-generational household. Um, you can see where it kind of has its pros and cons. Pro being that the grandfather is an active member in the family. He helps out with the kids to an extent. But you can also see where it kind of goes left at the dinner table. You can kind of see how Grandpa's views from his generation and how he parented Richard, when it came down to the topic of Frank disclosing that he was homosexual. Um, and those kind of like how he held back the slurs, but you can tell that he was in that generation where homosexuality was kind of frowned upon, and it was just not an easy time for people in his age range. Um, but you can also see how his parenting styles and skills kind of trickle down into the way that Richard parents his kids as well. Um, Lastly, the family financial struggles, of course. Outside looking in, you would think that Richard is the head of the household, but in one specific scene, we hear Cheryl mention that she's been keeping them afloat with the money, and you can see how that kind of makes her feel overwhelmed. You can see how flustered she gets throughout the movie in the beginning. Um, just that, and the fact that they didn't necessarily have the funds to even travel to California via flight, car, the hotel stays. Like, there was just so many other stressors that added to that family dynamics that made it really, really hard for them. Now we have the fun part. Completing this assessment was very tedious and fun. I hope I did my best in attempting to capture how each family member would have answered. Here is a line graph that I put together to show the results of the family. Going off how the family's interpersonal skills are affected by the family stressors, Richard and Cheryl results are seen to be a bit mirrored compared to the children because they know these stressors. They're used to them, but they shy away from being able to effectively problem solve and, come to mutual agreements and to, resolve the issues. You see a slight increase in Dwayne, but that is only because he's a little bit older and, and can understand those certain dynamics, which was seen by him going in the middle of his crisis, where he was pointing out the divorce being broke, the suicidal ideations when it came to Richard, Cheryl, and Frank. And with Olive, hers is a little bit lower because as a child, you do not normally see the bigger picture and can fully understand the gravity of certain situations in the way kind of like how Dwayne could and how he was able to, verbalize certain things for in that moment. In conclusion, loved the movie. However, from a clinical perspective, the Hoovers struggle with interpersonal skills, which increases their family dynamic stressors. One thing in particular that I also did spot is how maybe with more testing, the men in the family could possibly have an undiagnosed generational form of intermittent explosive disorder, IED, starting with the grandpa. Grandpa first two scenes, I was able to identify his substance use disorder and the IED, which was kind of seeing how easily and quickly he displayed impulsive aggression over Cheryl's choice of dinner. Richard shown similar behaviors seen by verbal aggression towards his family as a whole and to the guy who promised him a successful book deal but basically lied about it. Lastly, Dwayne also shows similar behaviors seen by outbursts of rage towards his parents and uncle, writing and verbalizing his hate for them. Once Dwayne discovered he was colorblind and could no longer fly, he showed more outbursts of rage, verbal aggression, and poor emotional regulation skills. I hope you enjoyed my presentation. Please see the last slide for my reference page. Thank you and goodbye.